Well, joining me now is Rohit Chopra. Rohit was the former director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB. This was an agency that sprung up after the financial crisis during the heat of the Great Recession. In many ways, it was the brainchild of Elizabeth Warren. And fairly or unfairly, maybe that is why it has been a polarizing agency. Just getting it off the ground ended up being a partisan effort. It really is a not a partisan operation at all. It is meant literally what it says, consumer protection in it, mostly when it comes to financial instruments, whether it's credit card statements, whether it's the small print in loans. And so it is one of those agencies that if the public understood everything about it, they generally would be in favor. But this has been one of these agencies that is struggled to get to sort of take root in Washington. And I kind of want to start there, Rohit, before we get to sort of what regulating the economy should look like and who does it and all of those things, because obviously with the president's attempts to sort of get control of the Fed board means, all of this is part of this conversation. And the entire, when Democrats have had the presidency, for the two times that the CFPB has been in existence, it had real staff, and the two times that a Republican were in charge of the executive branch, it was not taken seriously. So let me start there, Rohit. Why has it been so difficult for this agency to sort of take root in Washington, to beyond being seen as a partisan instrument?
Yeah, well, you say the CFPB and its mission has been politically polarizing. The funny thing is that that's only true in Washington, D.C. There is nothing really controversial. And actually, when you ask people, no matter whether they are in a blue state or red state, it's pretty common that they have a lot of skepticism about how powerful financial institutions are treating them, whether it is the outrageous interest rates on their credit cards, how they are treated in terms of mysterious junk fees that pop up in their life, to often their sense that the game is really rigged against them when it comes to getting ahead financially. So, of course, there is going to be very deep-pocketed interests who not only didn't want this agency ever to be formed, but have wanted to kill it from day one.
What is the agency? Let's backtrack. Let's assume, because I do think that there are, everybody's like, yeah, I know what you're talking about, but tell me more about this agency. Like, to explain, there's a great, explain it to me, like I've never been to Washington, and what the intent and then the practice of this agency. Give me the intent first.
Well, there's a lot of law on the books to make sure that when you get that credit card statement or when you get that mortgage, you are not cheated. You are supposed to be disclosed the key terms, and there's not supposed to be any funny business to rip you off. But you know what we saw, Chuck?
Well, what is funny business? I mean, I understand, you say it, but give me an example of something that.
Well, let's say you have a credit report, and I put on your credit report that you owe me $2,600 for an unpaid auto loan, and it turns out you don't, that you already paid it. But I'm going to coerce you into paying it by saying I'm going to keep this on your credit report unless you pay me. Or let's say that you have refinanced your mortgage, but the old mortgage company says that you still have a balance with them. These are just basic laws to make sure that you cannot be bullied and that you cannot be ripped off. And most of it is pretty common sense, but what we found in the years leading up to the financial crisis was that the agencies that were supposed to be enforcing it weren't doing anything.
Who were those agencies? FDIC?
It was a long list, but the top of the list was the Federal Reserve Board.
The
They
Fed
were
itself, that the Federal Reserve Board should have been a regulatory body?
Oh, it was. It had all the power to regulate subprime mortgages. It had all
Mm-hmm.
the power to regulate credit cards, but it didn't. And actually, there was a host of other agencies, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the bank regulators like the FDIC, and an obscure one called the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. Nobody was fulfilling their responsibilities because consumer protection was last on their list that they were given from Congress.
Well, explain where they were whiffing? Like what, I mean, because I remember, in many ways, Elizabeth Warren's political career grew out of the financial crisis, right? She was sort of this expert on these issues that many members of the media would put on, and she started getting traction on this, and she was pushing for this agency. Is it something that it was too spread out? Like one agency was looking at credit reports, one agency was looking at loans, one agency was looking at credit card statements, which were different from larger loans, or what was it exactly?
It was spread out, and there was not enough enforcement teeth. Mm-hmm. So what the Congress did is consolidated it and put forth some real powers, including taking some of these big financial institutions to court to halt them when they are abusing consumers, to get consumers immediate refunds, and to make them really pay rather than just sweep it under the rug. And the record is one that has uncovered some pretty big scandals. The Wells Fargo fake account scandal, illegal auto repossessions, systemic errors on credit reports, student loan abuses. And these are some of the things that I think Americans are pretty sick and tired of dealing with. But once you have some real focus, a lot of that was cleaned up in the market.
There's a big financial institution that I believe you had levied a huge fine on, and they have since the case was thrown out. Is that correct?
Well, it's actually more interesting than that, which is that lots of companies were subject to orders that they agreed to. These were settlements. And now routinely, the new leadership of the CFPB is ripping up those settlements and telling companies they now have a pardon.
So give me an example of a big one and what the settlement was about and what the money was going to be used for.
One that really bugs me is related to Navy Federal Credit Union. This is not a credit union that most people bank with, but one that serves a lot of military service members, not just people
and their family.
in the Navy.
Right. Yeah.
And they were caught in a years-long overdraft fee scheme. They agreed to pay substantial penalties and, frankly, refunds to all the people they cheated, but they were able to lobby themselves out of that agreement.
Yeah. Is the Treasury Secretary the acting CFPB head right now? Is that what is he?
Well, after I was fired, he was put in, and then we don't know exactly what happened. Elon Musk maybe got involved, and now it is Russ Vought.
Oh, the budget director's in charge of this now.
That is right.
This was supposed to be an agency that was a derivative of the Fed, which what would that have meant in the executive branch org chart?
Yeah, so all the bank regulatory agencies, Congress has tried to keep them a little bit separated from the political football of Congress.
Right.
And so they all have dedicated funding. They all are subjected to lots of oversight, but they have, just like the Fed, their own budget line to draw funds for, because we have seen how special interests are able to hijack that process in order to stop oversight of their industries.
You're actually uniquely suited to answer this question, because one of the arguments that some Republicans made against starting this agency is, well, we have the FTC. You've actually served on the FTC, I believe. So what's the difference?
Well, it's a weird argument in my view, because the FTC has always been banned from bringing enforcement actions against banks.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what industry is involved in offering financial services to consumers? Banks. So it is a little bit weird. And in fact, the FTC is also supposed to be policing everything from horse racing to pharmaceuticals and more. And Chuck, I'm totally open. I love the idea of reorganizing, restructuring. In fact, the CFPB, when it was created, another agency was totally eliminated. So I'm up for that, but this is a fake reason. There is no duplication, and the law is clear that the CFPB has exclusive authority to enforce these laws against big banks. No one else can.
So is that the CFPB is the primary regulatory focus is banks and credit unions?
And all those other non-bank companies that offer mortgages, auto loans, student loans, credit reports, debt collectors. It's really all those people that you're paying those monthly bills to.
So in theory, the Target's credit card company?
So Target's credit card, all of those credit card companies were totally subject to the enforcement and the rules of the CFPB.
And the FTC never had oversight over how Target issued credit cards?
Well, credit cards are issued through banks. Usually you enter into
some sort of partnership, a licensing agreement. Right?
That's exactly right.
So in that sense, it would be the bank that was running.
That's right.
Yeah, like, right now, Apple is looking for a new bank to back its Apple card, right? It's been Goldman Sachs, and they're looking for a different bank to back them. So you wouldn't have, that's where the CFPB, not FTC.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, we brought a major enforcement action against Goldman Sachs for abuses in that Apple Card product and against the likes of Citibank, others, including for those store-branded cards.
If you had to make the case to Republicans of why they should be in favor of the CFPB, what would be your case?
Well, we do. And behind closed doors, often they would give us ideas for things we should pursue. This is what's so ironic when you look at the consumer complaints, when you look at the individuals that benefit from this type of watchdog agency. It is not some sort of red or blue item. In fact, a disproportionate numbers of people from red states have benefited from it. But look, Chuck, this is in some ways simpler than what you're asking. This is about big money and power and who calls the shots in Congress and in Washington. And when you have big financial firms with lots of power in Washington, guess where? They are going to try and target some of the defanging of law enforcement. And the CFPB was a prime target.
Where does crypto fall into this? And is it something that you would argue belongs in CFPB, which it argues, does it belong in the FTC when it comes to regulating these stable coins, regulating how they're sort of issued, how they're used, et cetera? Or are we still trying to figure that out? I mean, I know they passed the Genius Act, which was supposed to give some clarity to this. But if you were still the head of the CFPB, would you be arguing that what parts of crypto do you think should fall under the CFPB? Yeah,
so crypto is kind of, if we think of it as a technology, in as much that it's being used as a consumer payment that you can use at retail stores, whomever, that would be covered by the CFPB. As you know, most of crypto is more in the speculative trading world. It's more, kind of what we would have our market regulators, SEC and other agencies, CFPB.
Well, that's what the question is. Is it something that belongs? Is it a stock or is it a commodity?
Yeah, so that's really the stuff that's traded. I think what we're starting to see is an effort to create, as you mentioned, what's known as stable coins, which is basically a kind of payment device.
Feels like a credit card.
Right. Yeah, it's more. It's
just a new way to call it credit card. I mean, and so it used to be a whole bunch of companies would issue a credit card. Now they're going to issue stable coins.
That's right. And so there are lots of laws and rules on the books that, for example, when your credit card or debit card is misused, you have some rights to dispute it when it's fraudulent. Those laws have to apply too for these stable coins. And that's the type of thing that the CFPB would enforce if those technologies really came to pass. And one of the things we really focused on was how these big tech companies were creating new payment instruments and currencies, and to make sure that they were subject to the same type of oversight when it came to fraud, hacks, errors, and other places where consumers can lose a lot of money.
Were you there when Facebook floated doing their own currency and then they backed off after they realized that the government would be all over them?
Well, I was an FTC commissioner at the time. And, when Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg, others, when they concocted this was a big moment because it showed that big tech companies, if they could get their hands on currency, it would give them the power to track transactions throughout the entire economy,
right,
and be able to, in some ways, coerce merchants, as well as know a full picture of how we spend, when we spend, our behavior, so that they could target us even further.
Well, that gets into who should, so for instance, our data, right? We right now have so little, for whatever reason, there's very few laws are protecting our data right now. It gets bought and sold all over the place. And I guess the question is, if data is being used to market to me, that would be the FTC. If data is being used to look under the hood of my financial transactions, I guess that would fall under CFPB. I guess what is where, if we're ever going to have a Congress that tries to pass a data bill of rights, where should the public assume that the government, which agency should the government be, should we be expecting to protect our abuse of our personal data?
Yeah, I don't actually think the public cares which agency. They just want it done.
Well, I agree. They don't care. So the question I'm asking you is, which agency is responsible for this?
FTC is probably the right place. This is that already has children's privacy, that already has all sorts of data protections. It's true. The CFPB, others do enforce.
But when it floats into what you just described, that you thought that tech companies could suddenly understand our spending habits in ways that just make marketing to us even more aggressive and more potentially coercive. Is the FTC up to that?
Well, we would need to make sure of it. But of course, if it involves currency and payments, the CFPB may have to do it. If it involves your health data, there might be other agencies. We don't want to create too much of a monopoly on enforcement. We want there to be aggressive corporate enforcement, and we also want to make sure that if the feds are asleep at the switch, like they were with opioids, like they were in the lead up to the mortgage crisis, that states and individuals can also vindicate their rights.
So let's talk about the Fed here a little bit, right? The president is trying desperately to sort of get more spots to fill on the Fed board. Looks like they've spectacularly failed on Lisa Cook, assuming that the documents that have since surfaced that show they're whatever charges they thought they were going to be able to bring against her, they're not going to be able to bring against her, which likely locks her in, will buy her some political immunity for some time, I think, here. But what is it that the Fed is regulating that he wants control of, that you think would be do harm to the economy?
The founders, when they drafted the Constitution, they were very freaked out about the idea of the president controlling the money supply. They had
we didn't have a Federal Reserve Act back then, though.
They didn't. They were really worried, though, what they saw in England, where the kings were just using the money supply to their own personal advantages.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the Glorious Revolution in England was partially fomented by that. And they said they wanted to make sure that Congress was in charge of regulating money. You know, you fast forward through history and you see that to get out of some of the problems our country had, we formed this new central bank to be able to make sure that there wouldn't be financial panics, depressions, constant booms and busts, and to make sure there was some steadiness to our money. And I actually think that we should be worried about a president completely controlling the money supply, just like kings would, because this has the power to pick winners and losers, to reward friends, to punish enemies, and to use the control of money in ways that can give them even more power.
Right.
So we see the Fed usually is discussed as this kind of priests and priestesses who are, are PhDs in economics. But this really is a big, big question about who has the power to regulate money.
Well, I guess it's just one of those things where I didn't know we called it into question. Our economy's been fairly successful only when we've had a couple of, asleep at the switches moments, only when we politicized the Fed back with Arthur Burns and Richard Nixon. But for the most part, we seem to have a pretty good blueprint of how this should work. And yet here we are.
Yeah. And in fact, I think that there's a lot of effort to say, how do we restore Federal Reserve independence?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's now been dead for several months now. In the lead up to President Trump getting inaugurated for the second time, you saw the Federal Reserve make a lot of political moves to stave off President Trump. But I think that just showed that they were willing to bend the knee.
Yeah. Rohit,
and
there's every single industry, the media industry, that what's left of it in so-called traditional media did it. You've seen it in all sorts of political spaces. You've seen it in the corporate world. I've seen, you've even seen it with the mayor of Washington, D.C., right? Like trying to appease and hope that he doesn't come with a sledgehammer. And yet, of course, he always comes with a sledgehammer no matter what you do.
And they see this Federal Reserve institution as in some ways being able to wield immense power. And Chuck, look at what the Fed did during the financial crisis and during COVID, injecting trillions of dollars through Wall Street and the financial system, while Congress is sort of debating about programs here.
No, I'd argue the Fed saved our economy twice.
Yeah, and the question is that now, who will be able to pull the strings there? And what will that power potentially be weaponized to do? I think that's really the question that
give me some examples, right? We have Turkey as the example. I had Douglas Holtz-Eakin, a longtime sort of Republican-leaning economist, was a Republican appointee to run the CBO at one point. Mitt Romney, John McCain's been, but he has always held up Turkey as like, you want to know what happens when a central bank gets politicized, let me show you Turkey. Walk me through that.
Yeah, I think that's the most traditional argument, which is a president or authoritarian takes control over their central bank, tries to juice the economy by essentially printing lots of money, and the result is lots and lots of inflation. I think that's just like a narrow part of what could happen. But remember, the Federal Reserve and other central banks, they also have the power to buy assets. They can determine what to buy. And you hear all sorts of ideas now being thrown at them. Should they be buying
Bitcoin, all sorts of
things?
Yeah, and the entire crypto. I mean, that just the mainstreaming of some of this crypto that to this day is just an idea of tech people that want to make something valuable and create value out of something out of thin air.
And the truth is that the Fed essentially has a credit card with no limit and no real interest rate. Yeah. And people observed this.
The king of debt is president of the United States right now. He's going to love that.
And people were nervous after the financial crisis when the Fed intervened in the economy when it did. And Congress actually stripped some power from it. And then during COVID, injected a huge amount of money in the system, pushing up the stock market, others. So I think this is a power that some people are sniffing and they want to use it.
So there's some of my libertarian friends who, on some of these things that the logic I get, but in practice, it doesn't always work in a libertarian utopia. But there's a strong bent in the libertarian crowd of essentially you hear the phrase audit the Fed, right? And you'll have others even argue there shouldn't be a Fed. What do you say to those folks?
I mean, it can be, it comes off as a little goofy sometimes, but I try and have good faith on what they're worried about.
What do you believe they're worried about? Right. Like take the good faith path with me here with Rand Paul. Right. Yeah, and that's essentially who we're talking about here, who's probably Rand and Ron have been the most coherent critics of the Fed. And, doesn't mean that what they're advocating is mainstream, but they're probably two of the louder critics.
Yeah, I think you see a growing spectrum of critics of the Fed that have essentially said they are positioning themselves as the wizards of the economy, and they have control over this enormous, essentially, spending and investment power that has very little checks on them.
And is that a fair criticism? You think that is?
Well, I think there's something to be said that a lot of decisions that they do make would probably be better for the Congress to be making. Congress,
welcome to Congress gave up so much authority and power over the last decades. I mean, I'm so sick and tired of Congress members of Congress not reading the founding papers and not understanding what their role was intended to be.
And they have totally just transferred power to someone else rather than actually playing their role. So this is
because that's hard. It's hard to do this work in Congress, and it's easier to let a president do it and blame them when they mess up.
I think that's right, and I think we got to figure out what is it that we want this institution to be doing. I think the Fed should be making sure that we're running the economy with the real economy in mind, not just the financial sector. We want family farms, small businesses, others to be able to get loans, to hire people and produce. And I think that there is real questions about whether we have that system today where a handful of very large Wall Street institutions call the shots on how credit and payments move in the economy.
So I want to take you back. I remember when during the height of the financial crisis, when Dodd-Frank was being written, and you basically had two senators who were trying to work together, Bob Corker and Mark Warner, who were seen as two of the more conversant senators on the issue, meaning they actually sort of understood it, their eyes didn't glaze over, at the second briefing of how Dodd-Frank should work, et cetera. And, but I also had I remember talking to a few Treasury officials who said, well, only Corker and Warner really understand this, and that's what makes it difficult for Congress to write this law. And I look at it as if something is so complicated that the representatives that are elected to Congress don't understand it, then maybe the law itself is flawed. What say you?
I think that sometimes we create excuses for politicians on how they can worm their way out of making decisions about big problems.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is that money and banking from the time of the British Crown as our colonial ruler, these were hard. And Chuck, there's lots of hard things about defense and weapons and patents and medicines. This is their job. And I think that when we say, well, let's just substitute it for kicking the can down the road and letting someone else decide or see what happens, that's really, I think, malpractice. And we should be willing to actually hold our leaders more accountable to get more done, even if it's tricky.
So let me ask this. Did you ever try to regulate or look under the hood of an algorithm that was used to decide, how much credit somebody was qualified for? And if you did, how did the tech companies respond?
So the answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a law in the books that says if a lender is using some type of third-party score or data, they've got to tell you, if they deny you that loan, a clear statement of reasons as to why. Mm-hmm. And we would come up against some financial firms who they themselves didn't know how to interpret the algorithm themselves. And the answer was, then you can't use it. And this is what is happening throughout the entire economy. Mm-hmm. And as AI, which to me always has been a little bit of a marketing term, you should think of AI or an algorithm as really just a complex set of mathematics that is generating some sort of decision or content. And we've had that in lending.
I always say it's a probability model.
Yeah,
pure and simple.
And we've had that.
This isn't intelligence. It's just a probability model. Yeah.
And we've had it for a long time. We in financial services, it's called a FICO score. Mm-hmm. There's all sorts of these algorithms. And to me, they have to have some degree of accountability. When you are using those algorithms and you cannot explain why someone is being denied a loan, then you have to be accountable for that.
Yeah. How would you deal with AI pricing? When I wish Delta Airlines flew to more places because of the major airlines. I sort of feel like that they're the most consumer friendly. And yet I'm upset at them because they're the ones that have, although I guess to their credit, they're at least admitting that they want to do this. They want to lean in on AI pricing. What do I mean by that? Well, they want to maximize how much I pay versus how much my daughter pays, right? And she's a grown adult with her own income level. I'm a grown adult with my own income level. And so it's pretty clear Delta wants to treat us as different consumers. They're going to assume that I can pay more and they're going to charge me more. They're going to assume she can pay less and they're going to charge her less. How's that not discrimination? And how are we going to deal with this quote unquote probability model dictating personal pricing that, what I see as a price and what you see as a price will not be the same thing? How is that legal?
Yeah, I actually think we need to have a moratorium or ban of this. I was diagnosed with a serious medical issue several years ago. Mm-hmm. And like many other people who deal with cancer, other serious issues, sometimes notice in targeted ads really stuff they wouldn't have gotten before. Mm-hmm. No health exam, life insurance, all of this stuff. And you really got to wonder if somebody knows if you just lost a parent, or if you are struggling with mental health issues, or if you're...
Well, in the airlines, you have a death in your family, you're going to have to buy this ticket.
They should not be able
Yeah.
to use that information at all.
Right.
And I don't care how they try and justify it.
What is the legal justification that they're using? Have you heard a good
Their
justification?
legal justification is that it's not illegal.
Yeah.
And it is true that there are some things that are considered off limits. We have anti-discrimination laws that cover race and other protected classes. But
is socioeconomic status something that's a protected class, though?
No, it's not. And in fact,
not.
One of the best consumer protections I think that is out there is the price tag, because you know how much it is before they know anything about you. And I think we should be seriously worried about the shift in even brick and mortar retail that are moving toward digital price tags, or where you have to scan a code to figure out the price for you. I think
it's pretty obvious this is happening with Uber and Lyft, but I don't know how to prove it. In fact, right? I'd have to, where they're just, if I use the black car service, somebody else doesn't, the black car price might be lower for somebody that doesn't use it as often as maybe I do, because I'm willing to use it. And, it feels powerless as a consumer. And it's just like, great, this is going to get abuse. And I just worry that Congress doesn't even understand how to stop it.
Well, that's why if they don't, the states should pass laws to ban it. I think this is something we have to keep pushing on, because that is turning into a world where AI is not going to really help people. It is just going to help companies exploit people.
Well, and what it'll do is those that are truly wealthy will create false personas that make them seem poor. I mean, people will hack that system, and it will actually be self-defeating.
Yeah, well, maybe. I mean, sometimes it's hard to even figure out how to avoid some of this. They say, oh, you get different prices if you're checking a price with an iPhone versus an Android versus a desktop. I mean, I don't want to waste all my time thinking about all this. I want it to just be fair. Just like I don't want to walk onto an airplane and have to inspect some sort of records to determine if it's safe. It should just not crash when I walk on that plane. And this is why I think we have big problems on our hands when you have an administration that is essentially defunding and destroying law enforcement, that is essentially keeping the things we want to do fundamentally safe, so that now we have to even be worried about it. I mean,
it's interesting you called it law enforcement, right? Which is basically, the financial police, right? And if people saw the regulators as sort of cops, they might, there are those that don't want the regulators, call them bureaucrats, and those that do call them cops, right? Like that seems to be the messaging fight that takes place when it comes to regulators in general, but specifically regulators for the financial world.
Well, I think here's also the issue, which is that there are people who have had experiences dealing with nonsense red tape. And then there's, I think, the big financial firms, big tech firms, others, where people perceive that they seem to be breaking the law over and over and over again, and then there's just no consequences.
There never is any consequence.
And this is something
they just say, "Oops, we're sorry." They'll put out an apology sometimes.
Oh, and Chuck, you will have the law enforcement agency or the Justice Department or the regulator beat their chest about how tough they are because of the fine they've gotten, and then you look in the stock market, the fine is perceived by investors as just a tiny cost of doing business. And one of the things that the industries have criticized me for is that I really believe that when you have repeat offenders like that, fines are not a deterrent. They're sometimes an incentive. If you're making money and just paying a fine out of your profits, you have to face real accountability, like individuals in the C-suite. Were they calling the shots, and should they be accountable? Or should we put real limits on these companies in terms of growth restrictions? Or frankly, if they're criminally convicted of massive fraud, then perhaps they should no longer be in business.
Right. They should somehow lose their license, or their executives should be criminally charged or something like that.
That's right. And that's the real deterrence that I think people know. If it's a small business, they will be shut down. And if it's a big player, they just skate
They get to
off.
pay a fine. Yeah.
And I think that lack of that two-tiered justice is a very big frustration for a lot of people.
It feels that way in everything, right?
And it makes them feel that their government is just on the side of people who are exploiting them. It bothers me so much because we saw it with opioids. We saw it with the mortgage crisis. There's been so many cases. And now with big tech companies routinely violating privacy, other laws, it just seems that there is no consequences.
Look, they're singularly, I don't know what happened to the trial lawyers in this country, but they're singularly responsible for the current political environment that has caused all sorts of physical harm to people. I do think that Section 230 doesn't protect these tech companies the minute they create an algorithm, because the minute you create an algorithm, you've become a publisher.
That's right. You are no longer some neutral pipe.
Correct.
That information is flowing from.
It is. I think Section 230 is doesn't matter anymore once you've decided to start an algorithm and create one to do this. And
once you are using behavioral targeting, you are not some sort of passive billboard or telephone wire. You are actually in the business, and you should be accountable for your content. And you know what, Chuck? We have had a situation in our country where this complete lack of accountability has led to many social media networks and tech platforms being havens for crime, recruiting terrorists, and so much harm to kids and teens. And it just feels like if the current system persists, it will only get worse.
No, there's no, and this is, it is really frustrating that the tech companies have taken no responsibility here whatsoever, and they've not been held accountable. We all know it in different ways that they're sort of, that they're they're essentially marketing predators of using our data against us. They're predators, whether it's on what we watch or hear or see, or how we spend our money.
I think that if we don't solve this, we are going to continue to move to a darker place. I always tell people.
I do agree with that. I mean, when people stop believing the government is there to look out for them, that's the beginning of people deciding, no, if they're not following the law, why should I?
Yeah. And that is where we're moving to. I feel that,
I do fear that
when you have a small clique of companies that can control the flow of money and control the flow of information, those are the two things that a society basically rests on.
Yeah.
And you have now a situation where it is a small group of people who have the power to pick winners and losers commercially and politically.
How'd you get here? Not how'd you get here today, but how did you become a regulator? How did you, is when you went to college, you're very impressive degrees, both at Harvard and Wharton, but how'd you end up on this path?
Tell
me your origin story.
I went to business school, which really, that school was it has produced financiers, felons, everything in between. And finance was actually, to me, a place that was supposed to be about creating companies, creating opportunities. And when I witnessed the financial crisis and the extraordinary failure of federal law enforcement and regulators, I really became so disillusioned with how the system was working. And I think the only answer to it was really to choose a different path. And in some ways, taking on these concentrated corporate interests who want to see the regulators as lapdogs rather than watchdogs. That's what we have to stop. And I think that lots of people around this country, I really spent a lot of my professional life a decade ago on confronting these big student loan companies.
Where were you doing that? How are you doing that?
When I was at the CFPB before I was director, and after the mortgage crisis discovered that there was a aftershock, all of those families who were unable to afford college for their kids because they lost everything, all of those states and cities that lost all their tax base, tuition surged, student debt surged, and you had a whole crop, millions and millions of people who were owing $1 trillion. For a few years, there was, I think, over 1 million people each year defaulting on their student loans. And this was basically a total and complete just travesty for the society. Young people owing that much money, graduating into a horrible economy in 2009, 2010, and would never, the data shows that some of them never catch up. And now you see a response to that financial crisis that has pushed up asset values, and no one even thinks they can really buy a home when they have that much debt. So I think that this is part of a generational piece too, which is that it feels that prior generations were able to have the benefit of a country that actually gave them affordable college, lots of pathways to be able to have a stable financial life, to raise a family. And now we just don't live in that country. We live in a place where it is basically a treadmill that you run faster and faster on just to afford the basics. And that is not what we want.
Rahm Emanuel was famously said in a sort of one of these after post-Obama presidencies conversations that I remember him saying, he goes, because he was an advocate against pursuing Obamacare at the time, or of the Affordable Care Act. And his argument was the public was so, hurting from the financial crisis that really the better politics would have been some Old Testament justice, right? And when people think back to the financial crisis, it is always, nobody got frog marched. Nobody got held criminally accountable for destroying, frankly, pieces of the global economy. So let's say there had been Old Testament justice. Who deserved to be brought up on criminal charges? I think about this because, during the first couple of years of this century, we had the Enron. Enron was sort of the poster child for a handful of companies that were ripping people off. And we put the Enron guys in jail. And I think in some ways it was symbolic, but I think it sort of served its purpose, right? Somebody paid a price. With the financial crisis, nobody paid a price. Well, actually, a lot of people paid a price, but not the people that were the perpetrators. If you could go back in time, who would you have brought up on charges?
I think there's a long list of investigations that were never even completed. I'm sorry, I'm misspeaking. Never even started.
I can't remember what, like the credit default swaps, like how did this start, right? Should there have been an investigation to figure it out? Like, where did this financial instrument start and where did it come from? And who thought it was a good idea and who noticed the flaw the first time they realized, these are going to turn into really bad loans?
Yeah. And you know what often is the excuse is to push the blame on frontline employees or others. Maybe they're not, low paid, but to say, well, it was a rogue actor within the bank or within the financial institution. And Chuck, this is not just true of the financial crisis, this has been true of many other big corporate scandals too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that once again, we are supposed to be a nation of laws where people are supposed to adhere to those laws. And if they don't, they are held accountable. And I think when you don't have that, that is just another signal that maybe the answer isn't to follow the law. Maybe it is to push the envelope so far and then figure out how to use political power to lobby yourselves out of it.
I mean, I could easily picture somebody at a financial institution saying, by the time they figure it out, we're going to be so much further down the road financially that we're too big to fail. We're too big to punish. We're too big to bring charges on. I mean, do you think it feels like that was the mindset?
Well, in fact, there was concerns about this with Attorney General Holder at the time about concerns, and he said it about concerns about prosecuting some of these large financial institutions because of potential market disruptions. So when there's too big to fail, too big to jail, and the list goes on. And Chuck, I will tell you that the accountability isn't just for those firms.
Yeah.
There is also a sense, I think this is true in both political parties, that senior officials, politicians, cabinet secretaries who were involved in supposed to policing all of this. And in fact, they just seem to keep getting jobs and keep holding positions of power. There is no question that under the George W. Bush administration, the deregulation was a pivotal reason for the financial crisis. But even those of us who identify as Democrats would admit that in the late 1990s, the choice by top Treasury officials and the Clinton administration to massively deregulate, of course, had a major role in the financial system melting down and destroying trillions of wealth. And I hope that we keep that in mind when we determine who should be the stewards of policy making.
Are you making the case that basically because there were bad actors in both parties, that in some ways it was easier to move on than to nobody wanted to see where these investigations would go because there were too many friends that might get swooped up in this investigation?
I don't know. I think it's more that there's lots of federal agencies that give white glove treatment to these big firms and big law firms. But I also think there's a piece of this where we should not have key officials who were supposed to be guarding against the financial crisis, guarding against these major breakdowns, to continue to wield lots of power in our system. And I think that is what we are seeing right now happening in our politics, that people are feeling like there is a clique of companies and individuals who just don't face any consequences.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people want to move past.
Oh, I think there's another populist firestorm coming. You know, if you could argue that Trump was a cultural populist, he was not an economic populist, even though he wants to claim he's one. But I wonder if there's going to be this sort of Teddy Roosevelt-like revolt right now. I mean, it does feel like we're repeating at least, or rhyming with some of the late 19th century, early 20th century relationships that government and industry had.
Yeah, and this is what the challenge is going forward. I am the first to say we want there to be lots of businesses, lots of enterprise, lots of new companies, but we don't want them to be so big and concentrated that they take over our politics and that they are not subject to the laws of the land that each and every one of us is supposed to adhere to.
Well, Rohit, I feel more informed and more angry. So well done, I guess.
Well, anger isn't always bad, but you have to channel it into
Yeah,
doing something. And I think too
right.
many people right now are tuning out because they are mad, but they actually need to
Well, I
tune
kind of
in.
think they've lost trust in both parties to do the right thing. And I don't blame them, because when the chips were down, did the parties do the right thing? And the answer is no.
Yeah, they've lost trust in the media. They've lost
Mhm.
trust in so many institutions. But again, tuning out is not the answer. It is to fix the system, no matter how rotten it is.
And you think we have all the agencies we need? We just need more resources and teeth.
I don't want Americans to have to learn all the alphabet soup of agencies. I just want people to feel they have control over their government
Mm-hmm.
to prosecute lawbreaking and to protect people from these abuses. And frankly, so that their government is responsive when dealing with the unbelievable challenges we face, whether it is technology and AI,
Right.
or the high prices that people are paying for college and for groceries. And they haven't seen that. And the way to do that is to make sure that politicians and leaders are standing up to these concentrated corporate interests.
Yeah, it does feel as if it is, even if the regulation is taking place, the public doesn't quite see it, right? Do you think, what advice would you give a future head of CFPB? Would you tell them that they've got to sort of be more of a public person, that they got to explain their actions more, they got to bring people in? I mean, I feels like now every entity has to have a communication strategy if you want to sort of protect your financing or protect your credibility. And I hate that. In some ways, I don't want our regulators to become well known, because in many ways that might undermine their ability to regulate an industry where a person gets singled out and gets turned into a political weapon in order to cover up what it is that person's looking for. But it does feel as if you do kind of need to let the public know what this agency's supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I think that's really a push, especially for whoever will be president next and after that. If they are not energetically explaining how they are pushing to improve people's lives, I think that's been true for centuries.
Yeah.
And those who succeed are the ones who let the public know what they are doing and who they are up against.
Look, I see a state. I used to joke that AG was short for aspiring governor, if you were a state AG. But you know what? The state AGs that became governor, it's because they were explaining to the public what they were doing.
That's exactly
what
right.
entity they were going on. And usually it was consumer protection. That was at the heart. And that's the most bipartisan thing you could do.
I think that I feel pretty proud that the CFPB helped to eliminate billions and billions of dollars in junk fees, whether it's illegal overdraft fees or being nickeled and dimed wherever you are. But you're right. It does mean that presidents, others, they need to explain everything that they are doing.
No, they do. I mean, you can't, yes, citizenship comes with some responsibility, but people have other things in their lives, and you can't expect them to do all the research.
That's exactly right. They are just trying to run on that treadmill to stay afloat, and it's our job to slow that treadmill.
What are you doing now? What does a former regulator do when they're in the private sector?
I'm not in the private sector. I am still trying to figure out what do we do to make sure that we fix this broken economy. And I'm spending a lot of time helping out people in the states, whether it's state AGs and others, do their part to fix it.
Rohit Chopra, I like I said, I feel smarter about it. And that's what I was hoping my listeners would get out of this, and viewers, and just understand that I think I think one of the mistakes that journalism has made is not enough consumer fronting investigations. There's too many investigations that are about getting famous people in attention rather than just helping people save money or not get ripped off. And whether you're in government or you're in media, if you're focused on consumer protection, that's how you earn trust.
Hear, hear.
All right, my friend, appreciate the time.
Thanks so much.